Back around 95, I know, looking at this grisly old mug, I must hasten to tell you that it was 1995. Sharon and I went to D.C. to attend a tax reform gathering at the Capitol. We were stationed there with the Air Force in the early 60s. Sharon supported us with a terrific job on the sixth floor of a bank building at 1701 Pennsylvania Avenue with a great view of the north lawn of the White House. As an aside, JFK stumbled out of Blair House in front of her one lunch hour, and it was reliably reported that my beautiful, nearly 6-foot-tall Irish heritage bride turned his head. When JFK's philandering ways were later made public, we realized that she might have been in some danger. But I digress. On the trip back, we stopped at Monticello. There were few visitors that day, so we joined 24 or so others for the guided tour. It began in the beautiful entry hall adorned with items sent to Jefferson from the Lewis and Clark expedition into the Northwest area encompassing his prudent and wise Louisiana purchase. The female guide welcomed us and began her well-rehearsed narrative. Toward the end of her talk, she reminded us that Jefferson had a number of slaves here. Several of the visitors muttered what were clearly disapproving comments. As our guide motioned for us to follow her, something inside me moved me to speak up. Ma'am, isn't it fair to say that as troublesome as slavery was and later became, it was in fact a common practice in Virginia and the other colonies at the time? And my reading of reports indicate that Mr. Jefferson treated his workers as well as or better than any man of the period. She paused, then simply and coldly offered, "Yes, that is correct." The tour ended, and we lingered to soak up some of the atmosphere that once surrounded this remarkable man, so remarkable that JFK once commented at a 1962 White House gathering of Nobel Prize winners that, quote, "I think this is the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge, that has ever gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined here alone." I paused at the bed upon which Mr. Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. John Adams, his co-author of that declaration, died on the very same day in Massachusetts. Jefferson and Adams had many disagreements early on, but the two men ultimately reconciled. Mr. Adams' last words are reported to have been, quote, "Mr. Jefferson lives." I even retraced the steps of the brilliant Al Gore, who, during the Clinton-Gore bus trip to Washington for their inauguration following their 1990 election win, their stop at Monticello was televised by the same leftist-in-the-tank media that gave us Obama. Gore and a tour guide stood on one side of the short partition wall graced with a portrait of Mr. Jefferson. They walked around to the other side and briefly admired another painting. They then returned to the first side holding Jefferson's portrait, at which point Gore asked, quote, "And who is this fellow?" Close quote. Frightening, isn't it, that this genius was a heartbeat from the Oval Office? But again, I digress. Behind schedule, we walked down the hill toward the small graveyard between that grand house and the parking area. We paused there for a moment or so, and then I asked Sharon to go on ahead. I stood alone at the wrought iron fence and gazed at the simple obelisk marking Mr. Jefferson's final resting place. And as I contemplated that simple, austere marker and read the equally simple, humble inscription, quote, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, father of the University of Virginia," close quote. I thought about the condition of the Republic. He and the others paid such a dear price to try to leave us. As you hear this in 2014, we have sunk to a low point I couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. Overcome by the moment, the setting, and my own guilt that I had not done enough to honor the memories of men like Jefferson and the others, unashamedly, I wept.